Scott, you can join us if you
I
like.
can
Sure.
observe.
You can observe. You can sit where you sat last time if you like.
Okay.
You can join us. Oh, you may be seated. Sorry. The power read.
I know. Glad to meet you.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time.
We're practicing decorum.
Yeah.
So we're excited to be here as well. And before we get started and introduce ourselves, we just really want to thank the parents for attending tonight. It shows tremendous support for your students, as well as thanking your teacher, because we know she puts a lot of work into this. So how about a round of applause for your parents? So my name is Jody Casper, and I am a retired Frisco teacher. I currently am the law-related education coordinator with the State Bar of Texas. And I have the honor of having worked with Miss LeBlanc. In fact, my daughter was on her high school We the People team. So I come to this with a lot of practice. I know, parents, what you've been through, and we're excited to be here.
My name's Pat Sitzler. I'm a retired U.S. history teacher. Last 11 years I spent here at Fowler, and I was Ms. LeBlanc's co-conspirator during some of that time.
So we are on Unit 3, right?
Yes.
And I bet you are dying to know which question we picked. Okay, so I'm just gonna jump in and read this question. During the debate over
I'm sorry,
ratification.
I apologize, Ms. Casper. Can you
Yes.
tell us the number?
Oh, we haven't done that in a long.
Number two.
Number 2.
Sorry, number 2.
During the debate over ratification of the Constitution, many Americans were fearful of creating a mighty and splendid president who possessed power in the most unlimited manner that could be easily abused. How, if at all, has presidential power expanded since the founding? What are the powers of the president listed in Article 2 of the Constitution? What limits, if any, are placed on the power of the president? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of the use of executive orders by the president? You may begin.
The Founding Fathers' experience with the tyrannical leader left them fearful of another strong central government. Consequently, this led them to create our nation's first constitution, the Articles of Confederation, which did not include a chief executive. Since the time of the Articles of Confederation, power shifted dramatically from a dominant legislature to 3 branches, each with its own powers. George Washington was the first president, and he laid many precedents that were not included in the Constitution. The stepping stones he laid shaped the political world we now have today. Moreover, under John Adams' presidency, American sailors were being oppressed and forcibly taken away to be part of foreign navies. He attempted foreign negotiation, but later embarked on a quasi-war without the consent of Congress. The Monroe Doctrine by James Monroe stated the Western Hemisphere was closed for future colonization.
In addition, Abraham Lincoln expanded his power by ignoring Congress and expanding the size of the army without consent. More recently, President Donald Trump has expanded the executive power even further. According to NBC News, Trump has reapportioned money set aside for national security for the wall. But because Congress did not agree to Trump Fund's border wall, he took money from the Pentagon, a national defense fund. Additionally, he ordered the assassination of the top Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, without notifying all the members of the Security Council.
Moreover, Article 2, Section 2 states the president has 7 roles. With the power of being chief of state, the president can greet foreigners, declare national holidays, and pardon before trial, during trials, and after trials. As chief of politician, the president is the leader of his party and can appoint party members to government positions. In a time of war, the president takes the position of commander-in-chief. Furthermore, the president poses as the director of the nation's foreign policy, contains war powers, can appoint U.S. ambassadors with Senate approval, and enter into executive agreements with other nations.
As the Founding Fathers were creating the Constitution, they purposely limited the power given to the national government and the president to ensure that history did not repeat itself. Taking from Montesquieu's principles of checks and balances and separation of powers, the jurisdiction was divided to ensure that no one group would have too much control. For example, the legislative branch creates the laws. However, the president can veto those laws with a presidential veto. The laws passed by Congress and approved by the president can later be declared unconstitutional by the judicial branch through the process of judicial review. Furthermore, the judicial branch interprets laws. However, the Senate confirms the president's nominations for the judicial positions, and Congress can impeach any one of those judges, removing them from office.
Executive orders are another debatable topic. An executive order is a rule issued by the president to force law. Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president broad executive authority to let the executive branch act faster and more efficiently than the legislative branch, to fix technical flaws and correct unforeseen issues. A famous executive order was the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln, stating all slaves living in the Confederacy would be freed. Executive orders can also be negative to minority groups, such as Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066 and the internment of Japanese Americans in camps during World War II. Moreover, once the president is gone, the order is unstable. While there are disadvantages, there can be advantages to this situation. By signing the New Deal, Executive Order 7034, Franklin D. Roosevelt lifted America's economy up from the Great Depression. By putting millions of unemployed people back to work, it also created many new roads, bridges, and parks. Thus, we strongly believe while this is a necessary power for the president, boundaries must be placed. We now welcome your questions.
What factors explain the growth of presidential power during our nation's history?
May you repeat the question?
Yes. What factors explain the growth of presidential power during our nation's history? In other words, why has that presidential power changed during the course of our history?
When our government first began under the Constitution, we were new to the whole idea of having an executive branch with one chief executive. When George Washington first took his role as the first president of America, he's filled in as in a position where no one had been ever before, and that created room for him to step out of his boundaries and create many precedents that we still follow today.
An example of these precedents can be shown in the cabinet, which was not included in the Constitution, and it was completely George Washington's idea. And every president after that followed exactly what he did.
I agree with my colleagues partially, but I think that the president's power has it's shifted on and off to being more or less excessive, because I don't know, during times like the Vietnam War, when President LBJ had complete war power over what happened in Vietnam, and he didn't even have to go to Congress for permission, I feel like there was an excessive amount of presidential power, but in some cases there wasn't a need for that much presidential power.
How is the system of checks and balances designed to limit the exercise of presidential power?
In the checks and balances, they check each other to make sure no power is greater than another. And during the presidential power, each branch can check the president to make sure that he isn't overpowering everyone.
And rather than just having all the power with the president and the executive branch, they have it split into judicial and an executive.
Under the Articles of Confederation, our government was split. The power wasn't split. Most of the power was in the states, and this led to anarchy. Most of the states acted as individual countries, and our government wasn't functioning as well as it is currently today. And this led to the formation of checks and balances, which allows each branch to be able to have a check on the other to make sure each branch is doing its job and not abusing its power.
Our founders got this concept from Montesquieu, which was a French philosopher.
And they also had got it from their history with the British and how King George abused his power.
has Congress relinquished too much power to the president?
In my opinion, I think that the president has rights and powers that are right for him. The only power that I think that should be decreased is his war powers, because we've had instances where the president has abused his war powers.
Through that, we've also had like many times where they use their powers for good. For example, how Abraham Lincoln, he created the Emancipation Proclamation, which granted all slaves from the Confederacy to be free.
At the same time, we've had executive orders such as Executive Order 9066, where Franklin D. Roosevelt made all people of Japanese descent go to concentration camps.
How can public opinion affect presidential power?
Well, with the public, there's always like they have the right to vote, they have the right to revolt, and they have a strong influence over who the president is and how they're going to use their power, and if they're going to abuse their executive power or if they're not.
And the president wants votes to become president, so he needs to know what the people want and how to give them what they want.
Should there be a limit on the president's executive orders when it comes to overturning orders of previous presidents?
I don't think that there should be necessarily, because I think that at some points that's acceptable, but at some points it can harm the nation. Like for example, after the New Deal, after our economy had healed from the Great Depression, I think it would be acceptable to slowly take away the power that the New Deal had on the nation, but at some points I think it'll harm the nation.
I think that the concept of the president having the power to set out executive orders is necessary, but there needs to, but in some cases the president abuses that power. So I believe that while there should be certain limits placed on it, it is a needed power for the executive branch to have.
Let it all out. You guys did an amazing job.
I'm sorry, this is
Sorry.
the third time. Y'all are all getting homework tonight.
It was funny because when we looked at the questions, we looked at this one and we were like, oh, do we even touch it given the climate, political climate that we're in? But when we looked at it, it was so well written, and I think we were kind of anxious to hear what your generation of Americans would be saying about that. And I will say, I thought you did an excellent job. I liked your ability to get in there and give us your opinion. I also like that you asked us to repeat the question. And sometimes I think if we take time to listen to what someone's asking and just ask for repeating, it allows our opinions to be better heard and more well thought out.
I think the nation is in good hands.
So thank